There's been an absolute container home hype. Everyone and your neighbor wants to get one of these container homes. But now, having stayed in this container home hostel, I have to say they suck. And I'll tell you why. So at the start I was really hyped. It's something unique, you don't stay in this kind of building every day. And I like that you have these staircases. It kind of reminds me of like a water park, and you're pretty highly elevated. And because the containers are so modular, you can stack them super easily. Just put one on top of the other, weld them together, and create a pretty high building super easily, which is great because you have nicer views. If you're higher up, you have a really nice and fresh airflow, which is super important here in Nicaragua because it's so hot. And speaking of heat, that's the first real big negative point that I've experienced. You're basically living in a metal box with the blazing sun hitting it directly. Now, they have built this separate roof over the container, mainly for heat dissipation, I believe, because you see they have a little gap where air circulation can flow through. But especially with these homes here, the sun in the afternoon will be on that side and just hit the wall here directly and heat up the metal box like a sauna. Now let me give you a quick room tour. Here we have a big window that acts as the door. We go in, we have bathroom and shower on one side and the bed on another. Two more cut-out windows here and one in the bathroom. And I don't know about you guys, but for me this does not feel super home. It does not feel cozy at all. It just feels like you're living in a shipping container. But yeah, it reminds me of like a construction site, temporary shelter, refugee kind of home. And you would not want to live like this for a long period of time, or at least it's not my ideal sort of human living space. I do think though that with a little bit more effort, they could have made this much nicer. For example, they just have a bare bones light bulb up there, and I guess that's to save costs, but they could have just had like a nicer lighting, especially like the color is just pure white, so it really adds to that construction building site vibe. And if they had just made the color temperature more orange and have like a nicer, indirect lighting setup, that would have made worlds difference. I also not a huge fan of the windows. They just look super cheap, and maybe they could have also painted the inside with a more interesting color instead of just making it all blank white. Now, as you can see, they did not actually insulate the inside walls. Normally people build another wooden framing inside their shipping container and add insulation so that it retains the temperature better. It doesn't get as hot in the day and as cold in the night. I guess they did it to save costs, but also, if you would insulate it, which most people do, the space becomes even smaller. So you're already starting out with a small space, and then it becomes even smaller, which is not ideal. In terms of ceiling height, I actually think it's pretty good. Like, I can touch the ceiling if I jump, but I have a lot of headroom, which I really like. I've been to apartments, I've lived in apartments that have a lower ceiling, way lower ceiling than this, and that's something I always really think is super important in any sort of living space, to have a high headroom. Even if I step into the bathroom area, which is a little elevated here, because I guess the plumbing and the pipes from the toilet and the shower is built in here, under here. Even here, the height is very, very good. Because they didn't insulate the inside walls, you can see all of the electricity lines and tubes throughout the container home, which I actually don't mind. I think It's not too bad. Maybe they could have even painted it in a different color to make it more of a deliberate, conscious decision. But yeah, it's not like a deal breaker for me. What is more noticeable is the noise. Because it's not insulated, you hear pretty much everything. And since one container here is divided into 2 units, this is my unit number 8, and over there we have number 7, pretty much split right in the middle here. I can hear everything from the other unit. So I think it would make more sense to, instead of like putting the containers all so close together, having them spread out on a piece of land. Then I would make the inside look a bit nicer and a bit more cozy, and finally try to solve the heat problem by perhaps putting it under a tree or in a forest, perhaps, where there's just a lot of shade from every angle. And then, you know, it might actually be not too bad. Let's find out how much they cost, because that would change everything. Now, the exciting part is that I asked the person working there how much these containers cost, and she said you can buy one for $800 US. I couldn't believe my mind. I was starting to, plan ideas on how I would do it. I would spread them out, like buy a bigger piece of land, spread them out, have them only one container in one spot, don't stack them, just have one container, and then with an excavator cover the back portion of it and the roof with soil, have a green roof that insulates and keeps the container cool during the day and warmer during the night because of the thermal mass, and just it will look super cool. It would also be more cozy, kind of like a Hobbit home inspired idea, and you would build it super extremely fast if you have an excavator, of course. So I was really spinning ideas, but then she actually gave me the number of the boss, and he told me that they cost $5,000 to $7,000 US per container, which is a lot of money, way more than what she told me. There's one like this that is for sale for $3,000, but it is much smaller and looks pretty run down. So I don't think containers are useful to what we want to build, but I kept this Hobbit home idea, this idea of building with an excavator, and researched that there's this metal culverts that are used in tunnel construction or to build like big sewage pipes. And you can buy these big pipes in very big diameters for quite affordable prices. I need to look into it more, but because it's quite an industrial item, the price is not like marked up for a consumer. So I think we would be able to buy one pipe pretty cheaply, cut it in half, place it down on some kind of foundation. Maybe you wouldn't even need a super strong foundation because we're not building like multi-story homes like this one in the background. Just place it down, cover it with soil, and have a beautiful green roof. Add insulation inside. You could use aircrete. Thin layer of aircrete should stop condensation. And then put a nice big glass panel with the entrance as a door. And yeah, you should be able to build this in a day or two, like maybe 3, maybe let's say it's a week, but you could like literally build them like that, like one after another. And I think you could get the cost down to 4 or 5K, including all the materials, mostly the inside materials that you would need. And of course you have to buy an excavator. But the reason why I'm so hyped about the excavator thing is because all the other methods from natural building are so labor intensive. You have adobe bricks where you're making these clay bricks and then waiting for the sun to dry them. You have sandbags which you fill up individually and then stack them. You have super adobe or hyper adobe where instead of individual stacks you have this long tube that you're filling with soil. But all of these methods are super labor intensive. Everyone is taking, a year to construct their home usually, if they're alone or a small team. Depends on the size, of course, but it's very labor intensive and time intensive. And I'm just thinking, what can you do where you don't need to like fill sacks with soil, but you can just use the soil on its own? And I came onto these Hobbit homes, and the only question left is how do you make the structure, how do you build the roof that you then, because covering it is easy, right? You just like throw dirt on it. and soil and then plant grass. But like, how do you make this structure as cheap as possible while still having a very sturdy structure? That's the question that I will pursue in the next few weeks and hopefully answer in the coming up videos. So subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and let me know what you think, if this is a stupid or a great idea. And yeah, see you in the next. Bye.